Hey guys, I'm Bruce, I'm a noob, and I have finished building Border Models Panzer IV F2G, and I thought I would share, I guess, my observations and thoughts on how the kit went together, some things I liked about it, some things I didn't, and where you need to pay maybe some special attention as you're going through the instructions. So, without further ado, let's get into it, and we'll do it step by step through the instruction manual, and I'll kind of pass on my thoughts as we go. So starting off on the kit itself, no major dramas in step 2. Definitely, as I think I mentioned in my inbox review, you want to wait before putting on either the PE or the plastic louver covers because you want them to sit flat on the fender. So don't worry about those. Same for step 3, of course, we talk about those there and don't put those on yet. The side vision ports in the hull, I tried one of them precariously sort of balancing the little swinging arm there on top of the hooks. There's little hooks inside there. The little grills, there's like little supports that are molded into the inside of the aperture, the opening for the vision port. I actually cut those out. I'll show you a picture of what that looked like because I wanted to have these open. I didn't want any chance of somebody kind of peering in the side and seeing those supports there. So just used the nippers and got those out. And then you basically kind of hang the little support arm off of a couple of brackets at the top there, and the two little ends kind of poke out through the hole, and there's little receptors there on the back of the cover itself. Don't use extra thin glue on that because it'll seep out everywhere, and I actually glued it shut the first time I tried it. So I just put a couple of dabs of regular Tamiya cement, not the extra thin, on there, and it worked fine. So now I've got articulating vision ports, which is important for the paint job I'm going to do, where you'll see when it's built I need to be able to have those open or closed during the painting process. No issues at all with step 4. Everything went together pretty well. Again, the vision port on the other side, and our jack block and the armored vent cover for the brake vents. I didn't use the cleaning rods, and you know there's issues with those if you want to do an F2, which is what I'm building. So they're not on place in my kit. In fact, I put the, you can see there I've got the, there you go, you can see there I've got the idler adjuster in that position because that's what the unit did that I'm building, 14 Panzer Division. So summer 42 they had, some of the tanks had the idler adjuster there. Now, here's a word to the wise. It has you putting on the sides of the engine louvers in step 4. I strongly recommend you wait and do not put those on yet. What wound up happening is I put them on and then later put the superstructure top on. And that didn't work very well because once these are in place, you can't guarantee you're going to get a nice clean seam there along the top of the engine deck. And in fact, I had a big gap left, and I've got some sprue goo in there, which is still drying a little bit, and I'll sand that down to get a smooth joint. So wait until you put the sides of the engine decks on. Don't put those on right away, as the instructions say. So step 5, we've got the bump stops going on. Those went on great. In fact, it's a neat little system they have because the brackets are already in place. You just kind of pop the round bump stop in, and there's a little pin that goes into the side of the hull, and it all worked out actually really nicely. So I like that system. When you're mounting the front toe points onto the hull, be careful. The instructions have a mistake here. They've switched F24 and 23 on the, I guess, the right hand side. You want F23 on the outside on both, and F24 on the inside. 23 is slightly longer, and so the longer piece goes on the outside. So just watch out for that. So as we talked about in the inbox review as well, step 7, make sure you invert these two sub-assemblies because you have to make sure that the square end of the bogie assembly is actually facing the front of the tank. So step 8 proved a little bit challenging for me, only because I was correcting the problem with the little plate there that has the inertial starter cover in it. So I had to kind of shave that off and try to make it smooth. It's okay. It's a bit awkward to get in there without, because there's little bolts around it, without destroying the bolts while you're sanding. So I'll claim victory, but you know, it's not an absolute victory by any stretch. Same thing with the Fuchs cover, which is over here. This is upside down, so that's on the left side of that little plate there. Had to sand that off and use a lot of filler and sprue glue and get that down to something resembling a flat plate. So other than that, no problems. The auxiliary muffler and the main muffler actually went together very well, and even though it was a two-piece assembly, it fit quite nicely. Didn't have to do any filling. I just did a bit of scraping and sanding, and it came up pretty nice. So I was happy with the muffler, even though it's a two-piece. No issues at all. The back of the engine compartment, again, no real problems. This smoke discharger, which I'm using because I'm doing an early F2, went together very nicely. No problems. You have to drill out a couple of holes in the back of the engine compartment rear there, and it fit like a glove. So no problems there. Well done. Drive sprockets went together great, as did the road wheels and the idlers. Very nice, you know, just a tiny bit of sanding to get everything smooth around the idler or whatnot, but no problems. The rear toe point took a bit of, you know, kind of bending or pushing to kind of get it to sit tight while the glue was setting up. But again, not a major problem. It went together okay. So here you can see the rear plate there, where the Fuchs port was. And there's that little panel where the inertial starter was, and you can probably see there's some filler in there. And it's a bit shiny because I used some extra thin to try to smooth it out a bit. So, you know, no problems. Be nice if they gave you the option of not having to do that and just if you got a separate add-on piece that just came flat like that. But that's okay. Bit of work, but it came out all right. Just make sure you have a good scalpel blade, or sorry, a chisel blade for your X-Acto handle. And I haven't put the muffler on because I'm going to, of course, weather that up and give it a little bit of rust before I mount it on. And that's easier to do off the tank. So that's the rear there. I was surprised it was actually relatively easy, with a good chisel blade to shave off this later model bolt-on toe point and just leave the flat panel underneath it. It came out okay, and a bit of sanding, it was smooth, no problems there. Let's talk about the fenders. As I talked about with the inbox review, Border has all of the little holes for mounting your tools pre-molded into the fender. So they're not like Dragon where you can drill up from below for just the ones you want. And that caused me, well, I won't say problems, I'll say it was just a bit annoying. And because again, the configuration I'm building for 14 Panzer Division, they move their tools around a little bit. So what I had to do, I've got a punch and die set, so I had to punch out a whole bunch of little 0.9 millimeter round circles out of styrene and pop those in there and glue them in. So they're okay, they're level with the surface of the fender, but of course they don't have the anti-skid texture on them, so you're going to see them. There's nothing I can do about that. You're going to see them once it's painted. So yeah, I wish they wouldn't, you know, pre-mold in the holes for all the tools. Especially here, because these are the holes where the spare wheel bin would go. But that's a, you know, a mid-late G thing. And if you're producing an F2 kit, you wouldn't have a spare wheel bin. So the option of, you know, or forcing the the modeler to use a fender that has the holes for the spare wheel bin is a bit annoying. And those are going to be noticeable. Now, 14 Panzer Division, the tank I'm modeling actually had a metal box mounted there, so they'll be covered. It looked like a captured box off a T-34, but you know, it's still the fact that, you know, you can see them here, you can see them here, you can see them back here. The fact that you've got all these little, you know, holes that you have to fill, and you can't really reproduce anti-skid with just a piece of styrene like that, a little plug of styrene. It's a bit annoying. So one of the drawbacks of the kit, I think, and one of the less satisfactory aspects of the build. Other than that, though, the tools were really nice. I gotta say, I like them. I showed in the inbox review, they have the handles molded on, and they're pretty nice and fine, but the interior of the handles were actually solid plastic. So hopefully you can pick up, say, here on the tools here on the right fender. Just a pin vise, a little drill, and then scrape away the inside with your X-Acto blade, and they actually come out quite nice, very fine. Be careful not to break them, obviously, but they do look good when they're done. You just have to go through that extra step of drilling them out. Fenders went on pretty well. They have these little sort of positive guides here to fit them in under the sides of the superstructure, which again are molded onto that one-piece hull tub, which overall I kind of like as an approach. they went on pretty securely and they sat in place really nicely, so the fenders were good. Because I'm doing an F2, I did not use any of the additional armor plates, and I did not do the factory mounted spare track holder there on the front of the hull. Driver and radio operator plates, I use the ones with the signal port again because I'm doing an F2. They went on fine, no problems. The top of the hull actually was very nicely molded. It's very thin though, and that, I won't say caused problems, but when we get down here and we're actually attaching the hull, or sorry, to the top of the superstructure, I actually waited and I put on the upper glacis and the front of the superstructure first. And that allowed me then to kind of work this into place and make sure everything was kind of lining up properly rather than putting this on first. But because this top superstructure plate is so thin, it actually kind of tended to kind of pop up out of position with the sides. And so what I had to do is I basically aligned it in the front first and held it in place so I got a really nice tight join there, and then just dabbed some extra thin in there. Completely waited for that to set up, and then I moved back and did a little bit on the front of each side. Again, made sure it was in place. I had to exert a bit of force on the sides to push them in, let the glue set up, and then work my way back. Same thing here. And as discussed, because I mounted those engine compartment sides first, I was left with a gap along here. So wait until you're at that stage of mounting the superstructure top, and then position these in place. And the same thing on the back of the engine deck here. You can see, unfortunately, I do have a tiny little bit of a gap or an overlap there where they're not quite flush. And because there's bolt detail and stuff there, I'm not going to mess with that. So, you know, what we'll do, we'll drape a tarp over it or something just to hide that little unfortunate misalignment there, I guess. And I'm crap too, so it's probably largely my fault. But waiting until the superstructure top goes on to mount the sides of the engine compartment, and I would argue probably the rear of the engine compartment as well, should give you a better aligning kit. So the upper glacis, again, because we're doing an F2, we're not going to have these factory installed spare track links. So you have to kind of just get a chisel blade and just shave off, or you could sand off, I guess, all these little locating nubs, which are where either the PE or the plastic brackets for the spare tracks are supposed to go. That wasn't a problem, pretty straightforward. I found that these panels and a lot of the hatches have really, really thin edges, which can be good if you're going to have them open. Certainly it looks more realistic. You just have to be really careful when you're cutting off the sprue gates and, you know, shaving down, if you're using your X-Acto to shave down the edges, because it's very easy to lose your way with the X-Acto knife and take a little gouge out of them. So just a bit of care there. I may have done that, but luckily 14th Panzer Division mounted their own spare tracks. This isn't the factory version. To the front of the upper glacis. So I just built a little brass bar, basically, that could have been applied by a field workshop, and you get lots of spare track links with this kit. This was a bit frustrating. So you have two options. You have P1, which is the single piece, you know, armor plate, or you have E2, to which you can apply the extra armor. Because we're doing an F2, we're not going to have the extra armor. The problem is P1 is too thick. P1 is thick enough that it could be like an 80mm front plate, which didn't come in until the Ausf H. E2 is about the right thickness, give or take, for a 50mm plate like you'd find on an F2, sorry, but because it's designed, it's got little locating pins, it's designed to take the add-on armor, the actual plate is set back like a millimeter or so. So when you mount this on the tank with the upper glacis plate, it looks really weird. It's sitting too far back and it's just wrong. So I used, unfortunately, P1, which is again thick enough to be an 80mm solid plate, where it should be 50. And what are you going to do, right? I didn't want to use the up armor version on the front of the superstructure, so I had to use this because E2 by itself just looked very, very, very strange. And there you can see just how thick that upper plate is. So, I mean, it's, you know, it'd be noticeable if you're looking for it, but otherwise, you know, it's probably the lesser of two evils, I guess. As you're using your single track links to kind of get around the idler and the drive wheels, and in a few cases kind of bridge between longer runs of the link and length track. I found the numbering they give you in terms of how many to put on each end and in between worked a little better if you do 8 around the idler, so 8 separate links, 8 separate links around the drive wheel as well, and then here at the front of the tank you've got H3, which is kind of a section of about 5 links but molded straight, and then of course H1, which is the bottom. It tells you to put one single individual track link between those two. I found putting 2 in here was better. Same number of links overall, just 8 instead of 9. Now we're on the other side here. We've got our antenna and antenna trough. You know, generally very, very good detail. I was very happy with the thin parts. They were nice and thin, and good bolt detail where it was needed. Springs were pretty good. Generally not bad at all. You can see here. Here's the left side, complete with the antenna trough, the shovel, spare track links. Very nice level of detail, very nice sharp and crisp details on that. Okay, now let's talk about the turret. During the in-box review, you notice I commented on the fact that it was a neat idea that you could have the front sort of open on the turret shell and then substitute in either the sides with the vision ports or without. So if you're doing that kind of initial G-F2 or an early G, you can use a version with the vision ports. Anything after that, the version without. Sounds great, looks great in the instructions. The problem is that you're left with a seam, a very noticeable seam, both along the top and down the side here where they meet. So, bit of filler, a lot of sanding, and the seam along here, when you try to fill it, I had a lot of trouble not filling in the weld bead along the top there, and in fact I think I did manage to fill that in some parts of the turret. So it's a great idea, but I'm not 100% convinced it's worth it, I guess. I mean, it's cheaper for Border, no doubt, because they just do the one turret shell, and then you can use that in a whole bunch of different kits because you just sub in that front panel, but not 100% happy with it. But it came out all right, I guess. Again, it's just whether you want to put the effort in and make it look nice, I guess. Everything on the top of the turret went in really nicely. The cupola, piece of cake, went together really well. Gives you the option of the open vision ports or the closed vision ports, so that was really nice. Just a little PE sighting vane there, and good detail on the smaller parts. I've got a bit of sanding residue in that one hole there. I'll clean that out. And as I mentioned, because I'm using the version of the turret front with both vision ports, I had to drill the 4 little screw holes there to match the ones on the other side. So not a lot of work. And again, if you're reusing the same turret shell, I guess you're going to have to be kind of stuck doing that. Alternatively, they give you both sets of screw holes and you have to fill in the ones you're not using if you don't have that vision port there. But other than that, I was very happy with the detail on the turret. The turret basket went together very nicely. No major issues with that. Where I did have major issues was basically everything from the gun mantlet forward. So we've got our recuperator housing here and our mantlet. They went together okay. The top of the recuperator housing glues onto the rest of it. There was a noticeable seam there, so again I had to sand that off. There's supposed to be a weld bead, so I may have to put that back in by hand. But the biggest problem was that the recuperator housing didn't fit into the opening on the mantlet. So if you can see here, what I had to do was sand away quite a bit on the top of the recuperator housing. Unfortunately, I sanded away a little bit too much on the corner, so there's a bit of a gap there. I'm just going to leave it and hope that you know, weathering and pin washing and everything else kind of camouflages that a little bit. But that was pretty annoying. That's a pretty big deal when, you know, such an obvious kind of a sub-assembly doesn't go together properly. The rest of it, the barrel, of course, this is the plastic one. We can't use the metal one that's provided with the kit because it's too long. The end of the muzzle brake here, that did not fit on very well. It's like a little semi-spherical cap that glues onto the rest of the muzzle, and there was a major seam. The little openings didn't line up properly, so there was like an elongated opening on one side. So a lot of sprue goo and a bit of sanding and some extra thin, required to fix that. So that was, again, a little frustrating, more work than it probably needed to be. Came out okay, but yeah, it's not optimal, I guess we'll say, right? Other than that, though, the rest of the turret, so just, you know, if you ignore everything from the mantlet forward, turret went together great. But just some frustrating work to do that you shouldn't really have to do with a newly engineered kit. But you know what, came out fine. So we'll see what it looks like when it's painted. So there's our gun. Again, as talked about, that little piece on the muzzle brake just did not fit in cleanly, and there was a gap, and the ports in the side didn't align properly. So we've got our turret going on our hull, which I haven't actually done yet. Hey, let's do that. Let's put the turret on the hull and see how that fits. There we go. So turret on hull. That's what she looks like all assembled. And some nice little details, generally speaking, around the whole kit. The machine guns are really nice. The ends are bored out. They're slide molded, so you don't have to drill those out. Again, as mentioned, the mufflers went together quite nicely, even though they're two pieces. So I'm really excited to see what this is going to look like when she's all painted up. So guys, that's my post-build review on Borders Panzer IV F2/G. I'll have to say, I think overall I do recommend it. There is some pain involved. There's some pretty messy fitting in some cases. Parts that go together and you have to kind of force them into place while the glue sets. Some misalignment of parts, as we talked about with the recuperator housing and the mantlet. But you know what, there's probably about 3 or 4 parts of the build where you have that kind of issue. The top of the superstructure with the sides of the engine compartments, another area. But the rest of it, actually, I got to say, went together quite nicely. So I'd say I recommend it. I'd say it's good for, probably not for a brand new modeler, first time build of any kind of kit, somebody that's not able to do some filling and sanding. But other than that, yeah, I got to say it's going to come out, I hope anyway, once it's painted pretty nicely. Yeah, we'll see, and I'll stick some photos up on Facebook, I guess, once she's painted, and you can let me know what you think. So that's it. I'm Bruce. I'm a noob. Hope you found the post-build review helpful. Please consider clicking like and clicking subscribe, and we'll talk to you later. Have a great day. Cheers.